Hey friends, welcome to episode 607 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am joined this week once again by Chad Smart. And Chad, how are things going for you this week?
No, they're going okay. But did you say episode 607?
I did.
Oh man, we're such boomers.
I know I was waiting to see if you were going to pick up on that. Um, before we get into the heart of this week's episode, though, you and I recorded a show a couple weeks ago for your rebrand or relaunch of Question Everything and
Yeah.
Out of Touchstone. And so, how are things going with that? I know you're in the midst of
Uh,
editing several episodes right now.
yeah, I'm trying to get more than one episode done so I can be kind of ahead.
Hmm.
But yeah, hopefully, as this episode drops, Out of Touchstone, which has been on kind of a forced hiatus since February due to my job being crazy and not giving me a lot of time to work. Now that I'm unemployed, much time on my hands. So yeah, so we got Out of Touchstone coming back, and then they say the secret of success on YouTube is consistency, and that probably means putting out more than one video a week.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to try something else, and I brought back Question Everything from my casting days, and we got an interview with you, our friend Travis, my old Out of Touchstone podcast partner, Mike DeKalb, will kick off the series. And the first few episodes are looking at fandom.
Hmm.
And you and I talk wrestling fandom because that made sense. But
Hmm.
I'm sure we'll have you back on later on to discuss Smurf fandom and why you like communism. But uh, uh, that's just an old inside joke from Kevin and I because I don't understand Smurfs. I was never a Smurfs fan. No, even as a
Wow.
kid, I was like, good thing they're the second cartoon on NBC in the morning. They can be over by the time I get up.
There
So,
you go. Wow.
but yeah,
Yeah.
so working on that, and I think I may have mentioned it to you. I mentioned it in one of the interviews. I said I don't know why I make work. Well, I'll say there was a meme I saw a few weeks ago that said, in a job interview, and they ask you, "Are you a hard worker?" And I'm like, "Yes, I make everything harder than it needs to be," and that's how I feel with this because I could just be editing. I could just record myself and throw it up on YouTube as most people do,
Yeah.
but I have to add some bells and whistles, and hopefully the bells work.
Yeah. Well, you plug your channel so folks can check it out as well.
Well, right now it's Out of Touchstone. I may be switching it over to Positive Cynicism.
Hmm.
Um, we'll see. I got to look into all that and then figure out, yeah, do I want people to actually be able to find things or not? So
Okay. All
we'll
right.
see.
Well, as you can see by if you're watching, obviously you're seeing this. Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash are actually technically Razor Ramon and Diesel are sitting here, and I'm wearing my vintage NWO, not the original NWO design shirt, but I am wearing an NWO shirt. And see, I told you guys we're not going to stay in place. And
Hope it didn't tear a quad.
yeah,
And
uh,
why does that razor look like fake razor?
I know. Well, this is the actually, it's kind of ironic. I don't know if irony is the right word, but
Sure, it is Atlantis.
Um, we are recording this obviously July of 2026, the 30-year anniversary of the NWO, which is why we're talking about the NWO. But these figures, uh, Diesel and Scott Hall or Razor Ramon, I bought the six pack, the original six pack of Jack's Pacific. This was the first line of Jack's figures that were released in the summer of 1996, so 30 years as well. And Hall and Nash were already gone by the time they hit stores, which I thought was interesting, or they weren't gone. They were very close to being gone when I got these. So, um, but yeah, we're going to talk all things NWO today, and also as we go through this episode, kind of maybe some what do you call it, fantasy booking, if you will, of how the NWO should have ended, because tell me what you think. When I say this, I viewed the NWO more as a story and not a faction. Although I know it was obviously a
Mm.
faction, but initial thoughts on the NWO, I guess itself as a group and as a storyline. Hall and Nash come in. They lead the WWF in the spring of '96. Hall famously shows up on Nitro. I believe it was Memorial Day or the week before Memorial Day. Anyway, he shows up and
Mhm.
interrupts, and it takes a couple of months to get it simmering. But what were your initial thoughts seeing Nash and Hall eventually? I'm sorry, Hall and Nash invading Nitro. Were you obviously we were both adults at this point, so we're not necessarily thinking, "Oh my God, it's Razor Ramon and Diesel." But I know there was a lawsuit and all kinds of perceptions going on at the time that
Yeah.
it was a legit invasion, if you will.
Yeah. No, I remember watching that Nitro, and I've mentioned it before in the show. Monday nights, I would go over to my cousin's house and usually have a couple friends over, and we'd be watching Nitro, and occasionally flip over to Raw. But we were watching Nitro, and I remember the match. And I'm drawing a blank on the competitors. I know one of them was a Beverly brother, and I can't remember what
Yeah,
his
it was.
name was. And
I don't know if he was wrestling as Mike Enos
Mike Enos, yes,
then, or
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Mike Enos, and I can't remember whose opponent was. But cut to the hard cam, and you just see a guy walking down, and I remember going like, "Oh man, that guy looks like Razor Ramon." And
hmm
then like all of a sudden the camera cuts to him, and he comes in, and so obviously, first rule of television: if it's on TV, you know it's planned.
right, yeah.
You
I,
know, go
go
ahead. Oh, so yeah, so when he jumped over the barrier, and he's like, "Hey, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." And we're like, "Oh man, what's going on?" And then I think it wasn't. I think it was like the next week, maybe, is when he got up in Bischoff's face, and he's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I've got someone coming with me. The big man's going to show up." And so, because the internet was around by then, you kind of
Yeah,
knew
yeah,
who it was going to be. And then obviously, I believe it was the following after that is, when Nash gave his English lesson of, this is where the big boys play. Look at that adjective, play.
yeah.
And we're like, and so I was in, I was sold on the storyline, and I didn't watch, when I got to Bash at the Beach, because Great American Bash is when they power bombed Bischoff through the table off the
hmm
stage. And then they set up the 6 man for Bash at the Beach. And I remember that day was a friend of mine got married in Giant City Park. And so
Oh,
went to the wedding, and then went over to a friend's house afterwards. I was like looking online, like, oh, who's going to be, and I was reading who the rumored, suspects were,
hmm
and everything. And then, yeah, I said it before, I was never a Hulk Hogan fan other than WrestleMania 1, but this, and I still don't think I was a huge Hogan fan during the NWO, but
right.
he was in by proxy, I guess.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that has been talked about, and this topic is talked to death, but I will
Mhm.
also say, I don't know other than Hulkamania itself, and it has waned, if you will, as far as the people aren't clamoring necessarily to buy Hulkamania t-shirts, but 30 years later,
Mhm.
WWE is still selling, and I could have looked and seen, but I, they're still rolling out new NWO merchandise. So it's still obviously a money maker and a big
Yeah.
part of what they're doing. But I think one of the beautiful parts of the story with the NWO initially, and I don't remember what podcast I heard it on, but there was initial talk that Scott Hall was going to come out from the backstage area, which I think it might have been Hall himself who said, "No, this doesn't make
Mhm.
sense. I'm an outsider. I'm
Yeah.
interrupting the show." So that was beautifully done the way they kind of because it was unexpected. And I do remember
Mhm.
watching Nitro at that point too and seeing that and knowing, again, we've talked about it 1,000 times on this podcast. I was a WWE guy through and through. I watched both shows, but
Mhm.
I was disappointed to see Hall and Nash leaving, especially Hall. I was a huge Razor Ramon fan. Diesel, I was kind of tepid on, and my
Yeah.
opinion of Kevin Nash has evolved through the years as well, and even more so on Scott Hall. I've come to appreciate and respect him even more as well. But I feel like, um, without that shot of unexpectedness with Hulk Hogan. Now, were you watching live the Bash at the Beach show when Hogan came out and
No, no,
you were?
yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's just reading the internet and seeing what was going on.
I watched back in those days on Scramble Vision, as I've talked about before as well. Back in the day when you had cable, you could go to the pay-per-view channel and listen, but not hear, but
Yeah.
you could see kind of scrambled images. And so I was listening and watching it that way. Um, so I guess this is a moot point, but do you think on commentary, when Bobby Heenan said, "But whose side is he on?"
Mhm.
Did that ruin the surprise? Do you think did he take air out of the sails of that turn, or did people? Because I know people have kind of defended it and also
Mm.
bashed him saying it because Heenan and Hogan never got along in the
Yeah.
WWF, and so it was more of a Heenan quip to say this guy is an asshole. Whose side is he going to be on? I could see that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, because I didn't watch it live, so
Hmm.
I already knew. And I don't think I either didn't hear it in when they recapped it, if they put that soundbite in
Hmm.
or not. So I don't know. Like you said, Hogan and Heenan never got along, so it was in Heenan's character. But I I think he could be saying, the Hall and Nash had said we're going to have a third man. Hogan comes out during the match. It's not like he came out at the beginning, and so then it's
Hmm.
like, okay, wait, whose side? You know,
Yeah.
is he coming to help Team WCW, who had just lost a man? I believe it was Luger. Yeah, Luger gotten injured
Hmm.
during the match. Um, or is it so I think the revisionist history of the people that say Heenan ruined it
Yeah.
are just trying to find something to complain about because that's what the internet is here for. um, I think in the moment I would say probably 75% of the eyes didn't even pick up on
Yeah.
the quip.
So do you think 30 years later we're talking about this if it's not Hulk Hogan? Like, is there anyone else in the world that third man could have been that would still have generated the? But I mean, obviously, in my opinion, the answer is no. We may still be
Mm,
talking about it, but I don't think anybody would have been as impactful as Hulk Hogan because he was the leader of the golden era when wrestling became global
yeah.
and a household word in the 80s, and then in the mid to late 90s he's part of the kind of leading the charge of the Monday Night War. And I
Mm,
think had Hogan and obviously had Hall and Nash not jumped, when we talked about the butterfly effect and a couple weeks ago when we did the Stone Cold Steve Austin episode,
yeah.
things that if these wouldn't have happened, then wouldn't have happened either. And I think Hulk Hogan is probably going to go down in history as one of the all-time best baby faces and one of the all-time best heels because it was that reinvigoration, if you will, of the character that I think helped fuel that Monday Night War.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be cynical and typical IWC troll right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
I don't think we'd be sitting here talking. If it wasn't Hogan, I don't think we'd be sitting here talking because if it wasn't Hogan, the NWO wouldn't have gotten over WCW. If
Hmm.
Hogan was leading the charge for WCW, he's not going to be made to look weak
Yeah.
and have, Hall and Nash take him out every week the way they did the Horsemen at
Hmm.
DDP.
Yeah.
He's going to be standing on top. So I don't think the NWO would have lasted as long if Hogan wasn't a member.
Did it work initially, you think, because it was and I think there have been some arguments online about this. Like I view this as that's Oz and the Diamond
It
Stud
was Stud.
back in WCW.
Yeah.
Um, you know, they're coming back to either avenge their shitty gimmicks from back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, or so to on that end, and then Hogan, it did make sense because he was there and the fans were booing him because that fall, fans may not remember, but that fall
Mm-hmm.
before the summer of '96. Hogan kind of went dark and did I think Kevin Sullivan had shaved his mustache off or something, and he was feuding with the Dungeon
Mm-hmm.
of Doom, and he embraced the black at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, it was a perfect storm, and it all kind of fell together and made
Yeah.
sense. But again, people had talked about, well, if Hogan backed out because again, this was a big. If you listen to all the stories, Hogan was hesitant. He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
totally on board of doing it because for so many years, the red and yellow, but it had become stale. But in his mind, I think he still had that cachet with the fans, which he clearly had no longer
Me
had.
too. Yeah.
So
I mean, even
Sting,
before he left WWF, fans were
right.
tired of it. So,
Yeah, yeah. So Sting, and I think had he turned heel in WWF before
mm,
he eventually left, I don't think the NWO has the same sizzle
cash.
and effect that it ends up having. So,
Mhm.
um, but Sting's name was dropped, and I don't think Sting, in no disrespect to Sting, I think he's one of the all-time greats, but I don't think him in that role would have had the same impact. Again, pardon the pun, or effect that Hogan's turn
Mhm.
had on the business as a whole.
Yeah, no, you make a good point with Oz and Razor and Diamond Stud, and I think Nash even mentioned it in one of his, or no, one of them mentioned it in their one of their promos. I think it was Nash because I think he said, my partner, he was ready, he could have been top. I still needed some seasoning, but referencing the fact that they weren't going to get pushed in
Hmm.
WCW
Yeah,
prior. And granted, the Vinny Vegas and the Oz gimmicks were not, you know, and even Diesel to an extent. I mean, I think Diesel got over because of the WWE or
yeah,
WWF merchandising and marketing campaign. But I think
yeah,
Kevin Nash is probably the best gimmick, so to speak,
yeah.
for
Oh, yeah,
Nash.
yeah,
And the Diamond Stud, yeah, I don't think the Diamond Stud would have been, there. I guess there are just names that don't sound right when you say world heavyweight champion
yeah,
Diamond Stud,
yeah,
and with Sting, I think I don't think Sting would have worked because of that, because Sting was WCW,
hmm,
you know, and so and people are probably saying, well, that does make sense because if he's WCW, you turn him, but he was the company man, he had
yeah,
no reason to
right,
turn on
yeah,
WCW, and I think at this time too, one of the other names, I think probably the leading name, if I remember correctly, that was going to be the third man was Bret Hart because he was out of the WWE. He had lost at WrestleMania 12
yeah,
and then taken the sabbatical
yeah,
until Survivor Series.
hmm,
Nobody knew what was going on with him.
hmm,
And I mean, we would get Bret a year and a half later.
yeah,
But even if Bret comes in '96 as the leader, I don't think it would have made sense at that time. And it
yeah,
also would, and it wouldn't have made sense in the same context what we're saying. Now you say, well, what about Hogan? Hogan was the face of WCW, but he also was the face of WWF. And so it
yeah,
made sense that he had that connection and
right,
wanted to take out WCW because I guess if you want to justify it, he had come in and this I might be projecting here. I don't remember fan reaction, but the fact that he came in and beat Ric Flair for the world title in his first match, like for me as a WCW diehard fan, like who didn't like
right,
Hogan already,
right,
now I definitely don't like Hogan that he's coming in and pulling the same, I got to be on top shtick that he did in WWF.
yeah. Well, and here's something too. Back in the day, we both, I believe, watched Central States, and that's where I
Mhm.
really first saw Scott Hall, and he wrestled as Big Scott Hall. And he was in the AWA, and he was also a tag team partner with Danny Spivey, and they were the what were they called?
American Starship.
Yes, American Starship, and he was. I don't remember if Hall was Coyote or Eagle, but he was one of them. And I remember one of my first live events, he was on that
Mm.
show. Um, it did not click until much later that the Diamond Stud was Scott Hall from because he had the big bushy mustache, kind of looked like
Mm.
Magnum TA to an extent, had the
Yeah.
kind of a froish looking hair, and then as the Diamond Stud, he was more, talk about character changes. And I mean, I was definitely old enough by the time I was in
Mhm.
high school to know or should have known that that was him. So I always thought that was pretty cool. And then of course Kevin Nash's Master Blaster, and then Oz and Vinny Vegas along
Mhm.
the way. And I think they touched as Vinny Vegas and Diamond Stud as part of DDP's stable, but um,
Mhm.
obviously as we've mentioned, they've become household. Maybe not household names, but become more widely known in the WWF
Mhm.
as Diesel and Scott Hall. But again, we talked about it before. Had those two not decided to leave, do we get Stone Cold Steve Austin? Do we get the NWO? Do we get all of these things
Yeah.
that contribute to the Attitude Era? And I think a lot of the answer is no. And I think that they also help change, and maybe not for the, I don't know. It depends on your perspective. I think if you're one of the wrestlers, it obviously changed for the better because they got the guaranteed contracts. They got the favored nations clauses. They got more protection, I guess, as performers to go in there and make more money and maybe have less dates, which is ultimately what is good and a benefit for those individuals. So, but again, as a fan, I was irritated because again, I looked at it as a betrayal, and so that's where I talked before we started recording. I don't know that the NWO is in my Mount Rushmore of factions, especially now. Maybe the initial three guys, yes, I would say that, but I think we both agree, like everything, in wrestling or in general, you have a good thing and then you just kind of start adding to it, and it's like the Poochie effect. You add Poochie to the show, or that new character, and the NWO became bloated pretty quick too. I mean, but they dominated a lot as well. But then when you start adding Mike Rotundo and the Big Boss Man, obviously again former WWF guys, but it got way over bloated, I think.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Where was the sweet spot? Where should it have stayed in terms of members? Because obviously Ted DiBiase comes in shortly after as the fourth
Mm.
man. The Giant turns and joins them. Six X Pac comes in as the sixth man, and then eventually Eric Bischoff. They needed that leadership role, I think, and I don't
Mm.
know if Bischoff was the right. I mean, he was a smarmy prick, and this is another thing where the to the victor go the spoils, because
Mm.
I think a lot of fans think that Vince McMahon is the first evil authority figure, but it really was Eric Bischoff a year
Bischoff.
earlier with the NWO and being a part of that. So I threw a lot there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
Um,
go.
yeah, I'll just pick it off one by one. Yeah, I mean, I think Bischoff, again, going back to Scott Hall coming in through the crowd for that initial debut and stuff coming through backstage, Bischoff made sense as the one pulling the strings, because otherwise, why are these guys getting into the show every week?
Right.
Why aren't they being arrested? Why aren't they, so I guess if you're going to suspend disbelief, it helps that you say, oh, well, they have an inside man helping them.
Yeah.
The NWO got to the point, and I'm going to compare it to the Don Callis family in AEW right now, where I think the Don Callis family is better unified as a whole than what the NWO was, because the NWO, when they got big, was like your core guys and then like guys that just happen to be in the ring at the same time, whereas Don Callis kind of has some cohesion amongst the team, but unless it's Okada, Kyle Fletcher, I'm trying to think, Mark Davis, maybe, if it's Lance Archer, Trent, I'm forgetting who the fourth guy is, but there are job guys and there are guys that are actually going to win a match. And that's where I think the NWO, why they expanded so much, was because they needed job guys, because Hogan, Hall, and Nash aren't laying down for anybody, brother.
Right.
And that's, again, for the first 2-3 months, that's fine because you're establishing them.
Yeah.
After that, and if you're going to end, if you're going to have an ending to the story, they've got to get beat at some point. And, and then it builds all the way to Starrcade 96 or 97.
Yeah.
That for whatever reason, that match went off without being the way the match should have happened. But back to your initial point. I think the NWO just got too big because you were bringing in guys, again, that weren't, you can, I guess, if we're using the same criteria that we use for Hall and Nash, well, okay, you bring in Mike Rotunda, you bring in Big Boss Man, guys that had been in WWF and had made his name and gone back to WCW. Okay, fine. But again, they're not presented as legit.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest issue, but at the same time, WCW needed victories to be competitive and to have,
At one time, and help me remember this if you can. I know they did the sold out pay-per-view, which was an NWO
I
pay-per-view.
was there.
Okay, okay. Which one was that?
Fourth row, the first, the very first, the NWO sold out.
Okay, and
Fourth
where were you?
row.
Where was that?
It was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Okay. Wasn't the premise of that supposed to be like if because it was all WCW versus NWO people, right?
Yep.
And so
Yeah,
like
it was, but it was Bischoff and DiBiase were commentating.
okay.
It was, uh, yeah, I don't remember how they set it up specifically to be like why these WCW people were wrestling, but yeah, every match was NWO versus WCW. They also had the Miss NWO pageant where they had women that, for lack of better terms, probably would not be on a lot of beauty pageants at ringside. And so there's, I think Bischoff was talking to one of them at one point, and we're like standing right behind because we were like fourth row on the entranceway.
Uh-huh.
And, but yeah, it was just, it was not, it was a bad show because of, you knew NWO was going to win everything or mostly everything.
Right.
And then one match, and the matches that they didn't win all had shenanigans. So,
Oh, I gotcha.
because I think that was when the Steiners, was it the Steiners beat Hall and Nash for the tag titles.
Yeah, yeah.
But the referee, Nick Patrick, had gone down and Randy Anderson had jumped in because Randy Anderson, me,
Oh.
Double A, and someone else were in the audience watching.
Uh-huh.
Randy Anderson jumped in and made the count. And so the next night on Nitro, Bischoff's like, no, you weren't the official ref. You can't.
Yeah.
All the dust. Yeah.
So do you, how, and this is the part where I was trying to remember too. Wasn't there supposed to be like the name of the Monday Nitro, you know, it was going to become NWO Nitro or something if NWO won, but they never, I don't feel like they ever went with a separate NWO show. And if and maybe because, you know, how do you create something like that?
Yeah. I mean, there is the infamous episode of Nitro where they spent an hour, I think, tearing the set down and putting up the NWO. And if memory serves me, I think they wanted to do like NWO Nitro and then WCW Thunder. And it was going to be the two brands. But, and again, I could be making this up just with a bad memory, but I think it was like Turner Sports or something, like didn't want them to do that because, again, your identifier, your brand is WCW. It's what has been, you know, so if people tune in and see NWO, like, are they going to get that it's actually the same company or
a casual person? Might not get that. Okay. That makes it, because I think also at one point, and I think they did.
But then again, real quick, if you do just NWO, you know, Nitro, who are you fighting?
That was going to be my next question is how do because maybe the idea got floated out there and then the execution wasn't going to work. And so they just kind of begged off on it. So, because at one point, I believe WWE was going to do, bring back either Nitro or Thunder for after they bought WCW. And so SmackDown would go away and they'd have Raw and Thunder or Raw and Nitro on third. I don't remember what it was going to be, but I guess that didn't test well or whatever either. So, you know, obviously going along and we get the fake Sting, which I thought was pretty clever and how they did that. You know, this is what's missing from wrestling today. I think that we can agree on is that anticipation and making the fans wait. And you know, I think in 2025, 2026, Sting and Hogan would have wrestled, you know, a month and a half after that initial you know, creation, if you will, and they really held it for about a year and some change. So that worked very well. And again, though, as we've talked about, and I think most fans would agree that the execution of that was pretty crappy as well.
And here's real quick. This is again going into the suspension of disbelief. So Sting, you know, NWO comes up with fake Sting. WCW, Luger, Flair, all them are like, oh, I can't believe Sting turned her back.
Yeah.
Do you not talk to each other after the show? Like, if you're good friends, call them up and say, what's going on? And have him say, like, I wasn't there, you know. But
or Sting could call them while Sting's in the ring and be like, bro, it's me on the phone with you right now. I'm not in the ring. Yeah. But
again, suspension of disbelief. That's part of the storytelling. So
that is true. That is true. But yeah, those were good times, and like I said, initiated or really got that Monday Night War going. And I think we've talked about it before too, where my friends, when I was a kid, in elementary school and junior high, watched wrestling in the golden era of the WWF, and then they fell off. This brought everybody back. I had friends contacting me and saying, "Oh man, I'm going to see Nitro, in
Yeah.
St. Louis, or I've been watching, and this is crazy or whatever." And this is really before the era of social media too. So you really, if you're reaching out to people, you had to make an effort to do it. So I thought that was obviously a big plus about the
Yeah.
NWO and the way, and again, it needed to have more than what it had, but as I mentioned earlier, I thought of it more as a story and not necessarily a faction, although obviously uh, it started off that way, but it becomes this bloated group. The Four Horsemen stayed true to being four men and a
Mhm.
manager, and so they, whatever incarnation of the Horsemen you like the most. But with the NWO, you had all these extra players in there, and so I think sometimes when they threw in, I believe they splintered off and did the Wolf Pack with the red and
Mhm.
black, and then the white and black, and then eventually later on the LWO comes in. What do you think of all the splintering of the initial? Are we beat? It's kind of like today with the Bloodline. You had
Mhm.
the F or the what was Solo Sokolo's.
MTF,
Yeah, so you're breaking off into different little
MFTs.
factions of, yeah, MFT. Um, it's kind of early days of the NWO, or the NWO was kind of an incarnation of that as well, where you're
Yeah.
splitting into these different groups and hauling, because the other thing about the initial NWO is they made heels cool. It
Mhm.
really did change, I think, the way fans perceived wrestling for a long time, and I don't know that it's ever recovered since that.
Neither have I. I get choked up just thinking about it. Um, yeah, and I think that is one of the things that also hurt the overall story is that the the NWO wanted to be cool. They wanted to be, and that's why you see a lot of heels today try to be cool instead of trying to be heel. And
Yeah,
and I know like I think it was one of his last runs in WWE when Jericho was a heel. He's like, I don't want any merchandise because
mhm,
I'm a heel. People shouldn't be wearing my shirt,
yeah,
But again, the NWO shirt was a cash cow. So,
yeah,
are you going to give up on that money to, you know,
right.
um, as for I think by the time they splintered into the Wolf Pack and everything, you had gone way beyond the sell by date of the NWO. And
Is it fair to
I,
say it jumped the shark?
I mean, I don't think Earthquake was ever brought into the
I
group.
knew we were going to
Um,
get a John Tenta joke there.
um, I I think one of my problems with the Wolfpack too is like when Sting became Crow Sting, like I was like, okay, I don't like the Crow makeup.
Right, right.
I've never liked it. But then when it became Tomato Face with the
Yes.
red and black, I'm like, this looks so
Yeah.
bad. Even when his son did it at his retirement match
Right.
in AEW, it's like, no, this just looks terrible.
Yeah.
The LWO, while never was ever going to get a chance to succeed, I thought was could have been an interesting story of, you're holding all these guys back because you're catering to this other group.
Hmm.
Um, and it seems funny that the WWE kind of did the same thing when they created their LWO. I don't know
Yeah.
if they're still around or not, but I think that could have had a better storyline than the Wolfpack and NWO Black and White,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But yeah, I just think by that point, like the NWO, obviously no one knew what to do, and so you
Yeah.
just keep and my opinion is no one knows what to do with Roman Reigns and the Usos right
Yeah.
now, and so you just keep recycling the same story.
And we're going to get to closure of the original NWO in a minute, but I want to ask you this. In 2001, or, I guess by the time WCW was purchased in 2001, by 2002, when Vince brings in Hall, Nash, and Hogan as the poison to inject, and it's
Mm.
the NWO. And then the group kind of splinters again, and Shawn Michaels and Booker T and the Big Show are involved in it.
Mhm.
you still had Kevin Nash as one of those anchors of it, but I think it was right before COVID hit, and the story came out a few months ago. Right before COVID hit, they were allegedly going to
Mm.
reintroduce the NWO as Shinsuke Nakamura, Lars Sullivan, um, I think Sheamus, and some. I don't remember who the fourth person was. They were going to
Um,
bring back the NWO. I don't know if you saw this story or not.
I saw the story. I didn't read it because I.
Yeah, and I don't know how true it was or not, but when we bring back a group, because obviously with the Four Horsemen, when Flair left for the WWF in '91,
Mm.
the Horsemen, and I know by then they were all kind of disintegrating anyway, but the group became null and void until he came back in '93. So there have to be, in my opinion, there has to be core. Like I don't know that the bloodline would work without Roman Reigns being associated with it right now, or one of the
Mm.
Usos. So could the NWO have survived without the three principals, at least one of them not being involved? Because I think even when they did NWO 2000, I think Hall or Nash was still involved with it, and it was Jeff Jarrett and Bret Hart.
Mm.
Do you have to have one of those key people involved with it, even in 2026, if we were to restart this group? I
Yeah,
guess now it would have to be, Kevin Nash kind of signing off on it, or,
by
or
default.
giving the green light and being some part of it and then passing the torch along. Or is it something that we leave in the past and it's done and it's over with?
Yeah. I think we leave in the past, but
Hmm.
if you're going to do it, I think there has to be some acknowledgement from the past of, and you have to be like, okay, why are you doing it now?
Right.
Why does what is the justification for this group to be called the NWO?
Yeah.
And off the top of my head, I can't think of any reason why
Right.
it could be right now.
Could you bring
Although,
in a group of former AEW guys? Or, like could Cody Rhodes, when Cody came in 2022,
yeah.
could he have started a new NWO, and brought with him, some guys who had jumped ship and wrestled in AEW for a little bit, and then would it have been him and I'm trying to think of who else left and came back to
Aleister
the
Black,
WWF.
Rusev. Um, I was just about to mention Cody. If Cody would be the one that I think would be your leader if you did it now.
Yeah,
But again,
yeah.
I just don't see for given what the NWO was about.
Hmm.
That doesn't seem to be. I guess it. You couldn't do it now because he's already kind of discredited everything that he complained about in his famous pipe bomb
Mm.
promo. But CM
Yeah,
Punk
yeah.
would have been, when he came back, could have been the catalyst for an NWO. But
And could not that AW would have called a group the NWO, but they could have had that group of outsiders like when CM Punk came in. But CM
mm,
Punk was so despondent with WWE by the time he came to AEW that it
yeah,
probably wouldn't have made sense, because the general fan didn't know that Razor Ramon was negotiating with WCW when he jumped ship. So
mm,
I can see where that perception would be. He didn't, he wasn't doing shoot interviews after he left to say how bad WWF was like CM Punk had
right,
done. So I don't know that, again, it's kind of like, let's leave these things in the past. And it's kind of like with the Four
yeah,
Horsemen. Um, they've flirted with, I guess Evolution was probably the closest thing to a reincarnation of the Four
mm,
Horsemen as we'll ever get. But sometimes there was talk of the Four Horsewomen, which I know was Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair, obviously is the anchor there with the
yeah.
original Horseman group, and then Bailey and Sasha Banks. But I don't think, did they ever actually officially call them the Four Horsewomen in WWE? I don't
I don't
know
think
if
so.
they
I
did.
don't think
Yeah.
so.
So let's go back again to the NWO and closing out the story. Should it have culminated at Starrcade '97, and should that ending have been different? Because there's still debate over the fast count, and was it a fast count, and how that wrapped up.
Mm.
we're 18 months into the story. You know, is that long enough for a wrestling story? You know, look at the Mega Powers, you know, how that all kind
Mhm.
of played out. And this is again, we're in the heart of monthly pay-per-views and obviously 52 weeks of programming. So it's a bit different than it was live programming, that is.
Yeah.
It's a bit different than it was in the 80s, but should it have ended there and Hogan goes back to the red and yellow, or like how would you as a fan like to have seen the NWO end, or do you even have you know, was it something that could have just faded away and it didn't need to have an official, okay, the NWO is dead?
I think Starcade 97, that match should have been, and I know this is going to be hindsight 2020
Hmm.
and, everything. That match should have been 5 minutes tops. And
Mm.
it should have been a Goldberg squash like match with Sting just beating the hell out of Hogan
Hmm.
and winning cleanly. It should have been even a discussion of a fast count. Bret Hart should have played no role in
Yeah.
that match. It should have just been a decisive win by Sting. From there, you can branch off into separate ways, because then does that open up maybe Hall and Nash turning on Hogan and kicking
Hmm.
him out so that you can get the redemption storyline, like Sergeant
Hmm.
Slaughter coming back to America,
Yeah.
or or and I know this would have never happened given the high stakes of the Monday Night War. I've always thought that the ending should be whatever happens, the NWO gets vanquished when Hall and Nash's contracts are up, ship them off back to WWF.
Mm.
Let them, then you can talk about how you ran them out of the company. How they tried to come in, take over the company, and WCW prevailed. And they had to go, you know, tails tucked between their legs back up to New York. So, but again, I don't think I couldn't see Bischoff giving up, top
Hmm.
talent.
You're right.
And I also don't know. I mean, Vince would have probably taken him back, but
Yeah. Right. Well, you said two things that jogged my thinking, and
mm,
so I want to talk about those real quick too. You know, Bret Hart's involvement in that Starcade main event, when the NWO, when this story started with the Crow Sting and all of that,
yeah,
Bret Hart was still happily employed in the WWF. So you know that the end, you know, with that Starcade 97 moment
mm,
until the Montreal screw job, you know,
a month before, yeah.
so yeah, were kind of, in my opinion, and I think this is what you were saying too, is they're fitting a square hole in a round, or a square peg into a round hole.
Mm,
And so yeah, it didn't make sense, and it didn't, you know, because yeah, I know Brett had some beef with Hogan over the SummerSlam stuff
mm,
and WrestleMania 9 and all that, but that was several years earlier, and how many fans really knew about that? So
right.
I agree with you. I don't think Brett should have been anywhere near that match. Now, you mentioned Hall and Nash going back to the WWF.
Mm.
I can still remember, and you know, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, but when JR promoted the fact that Razor Ramon and Scott Hall, or I'm sorry, Razor Ramon and Diesel were coming back to the WWF, I really thought they were coming back to the WWF. And then we get, of course, what are affectionately remembered as fake Sting, or I'm sorry, fake Diesel and fake Razor Ramon. Glenn Jacobs, who we know later becomes Kane, and then Rick Bogner, who was playing that fake Razor Ramon. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, it was lame as hell, and I don't think it helped that WWF didn't do anything to make that feel any more legitimate, I guess, either.
Yeah, and again, cynic in me would say that was only done for the lawsuit,
Hmm.
so that WWF could claim, see, we had these same characters, but WCW has told fans, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but it's like they hindered our IP, and
Right.
so now we have legitimate reasons for the lawsuit. Um, which again, if that lawsuit hadn't happened, then you go down to, does WWE get to buy WCW for pennies on the
Mhm.
dollar, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah, the fake razor, and I think this is going to be one of the weirdest complaints I have. I think cosmetically, they didn't, not that necessarily they didn't look enough like Razor and Diesel, but they look like cosplayers you would see at Comic
Yeah.
Con trying to
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
and so it just, yeah, something just didn't. And I guess, if you bring in a different Doink,
Right.
no one's going to notice.
Yeah.
If you bring in a different Kimchi or Conquistadors, no one's going to notice.
Right.
But you bring in guys without facial covering or anything, people notice. And yeah, so I don't know. I think we've talked about it before in the show before. Like, is there anybody you could replace as a new character? And
Right.
under those circumstances, now that, any character that doesn't use the real name, that is a character base.
Mhm.
And I can't think of any situation where that might actually work.
Yeah, we have kind of flirted with the topic, and I was thinking as you're talking about that, in an era of you know Hollywood recycling movies and characters,
Mhm.
and we've seen multiple men play James Bond, for example. Will we ever, in a wrestling sense, see another Undertaker, or
Mhm.
will they dust off those IPs and bring in, I think outside of Doink, which has been very sporadic, but I think La Parka
Mhm.
or LA Park, what that they've used
Yeah.
multiple men to play that role before. But like, I am curious. One day, will we see? And it may not happen in our lifetime, but these iconic characters, will there be another, like I said, Undertaker? I mean, that's the one that immediately comes to mind of.
Mhm.
He's not Mark Callis. He's not like a Kevin Nat. I bring back another Diesel and maybe make it more, or another Kane. Would those
Yeah.
work in another generation? I don't know. Would their legacy carry on, or will we just let those characters? I know the men behind some of these characters are still with us, but do we let
Mhm.
those characters kind of rest in the past, and we don't need to see a young upstart be the new Undertaker? So,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see a need for recycling characters, but
Where do you put the NWO in your fandom of wrestling factions, groups? Because did it going on too long, did that hurt its overall legacy, do you think? Or because when I think of the NWO, I think of that initial first 6 months,
yeah.
kind of leading us up to that sold out event. And I know that they were starting to get a little bloated by then, but
Yeah.
really, Hogan, Hall, Nash, Bischoff coming in, and kind of some of those other characters, and bringing in Piper to feud with them. And Randy Savage turns and was initially feuding with the NWO, and then he becomes one
Mm.
of them. So because again, I think they made it too cool for school, and then all these other guys wanted to be a part of that, even though they were
Yeah.
supposed to be the bad guys.
Yeah. Um, yeah, my fandom, I think at the time, my fandom was, I enjoyed the NWO. Like I
Hmm.
said before we started recording, my first WCW pay per view was Starrcade '96,
Hmm.
and I bought the NWO T-shirt, which didn't have a WCW copyright on it because they were trying to make it look like, as a
Yeah.
different brand, which again goes back to trying to sell the story and
Yeah.
not just be
Right.
wrestling,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and I enjoyed it, but I think by '97, by after Starrcade, it was like, okay, this is, you need to do something different now.
Hmm.
And I think my get, getting older and getting to know stuff that was going on behind the scenes, and the power plays by Hogan, Nash's stuff, Hall, just like you said, guaranteed contracts. Oh, well, I've got a broken fingernail today, so I can't wrestle.
Hmm.
And all these things, like, those things taint my view of and they, in a sense, they shouldn't, because I should just focus on what's going on in
Hmm.
front of the screen. But if the behind the scenes are affecting the storyline
Sure.
of what's going on, it's like a movie. It's like if um, you brought up Batman, so that's going on my mind right now. But if they're going to do another Batman, and Christian Bale's like, oh no, I'm only going to do it if I get this, this, and this, and Batman gets to win every fight. And
Hmm.
they're like, oh well, then we're not going to have Christian Bale. We're going to go with
Yeah.
David Arquette, the greatest wrestling champion ever. That's going to affect perception. So I think just over time, I've said it before that I was obviously a huge fan of the Attitude Era,
Hmm.
but as we get further and further away from that, it's hard to look back, and those shows just don't hold up
Yeah.
as well. So whereas the early, obviously I'm a Horseman for life.
Hmm.
The Horseman factions
Yeah.
holds up over time,
Yeah.
or same way. Like I don't think DX holds up, because the DX is, I think, it was very rooted in that, um, say, man child Peter Pan syndrome of the Attitude Era. Maybe that's the reason why the NWO doesn't hold up either, is because, again, it was like, these 30-year-old guys trying to be cool.
Well,
And now you just look back
I
on
would,
it,
I
and
agree, but I would argue, I think they were, I mean, Scott Hall is probably one of the coolest, in my
mm,
opinion. I mean, he just had that swagger and that look. Like,
mm,
I want to hang out with this. At least for me,
yeah,
I don't know, in those early days, at least of the
yeah.
NWO. But yeah,
I
I
get,
get that.
yeah. I mean, I think, yes, in that time frame they were cool, but
Mhm.
especially after,
Eventually, though,
it,
it played itself out.
yeah, it's I look at it. Um, Not going to make a good point. No, I'll say it's like when Blink 182 reunited last year, the year before, and I watched their performance at Coachella, and I was never a huge Blink 182 fan, but when you're in your 20s, and I know we said the NWO was in their 30s, but in their 20s doing a shtick,
Yeah.
it's amusing. When you're in your 50s and you're doing the same shtick, it's
Right.
cringe. And
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
I think the NWO kind of was getting in the cringe part
Yeah.
early on. So
I agree. I agree. Well, friends, I hope you haven't cringed yet. Chad, anything else you want to mention before we put a bow on this week's episode?
I was just going to ask you, how do you think it should have ended?
I don't disagree with you. I do think kind of the similarly, putting some kind of closure at Starrcade 97, again, keeping Bret Hart out of that. WCW needed to prevail and be that dominant force, and Sting, of
Mm,
course, leading that charge. But yeah, I feel like it got convoluted with the Red and Black, and the Wolf Pack, and these other incarnations of it, and different guys coming in, because then I think, didn't they do like a triple threat where it was Wolf Pack and original and Piper's group of OWN,
Something like that.
or I guess it was the Ultimate Warrior with One Warrior
Was,
Nation or whatever.
yeah,
um it just seemed like it got uh, old fast, and it didn't hold up to what the original intent, I think, of three, or really two outsiders, and then Hogan kind of
yeah,
leading that charge, and so in that regard they started it off right, and I think, like everything else, it's too much of a good thing, and you kind
yeah,
of get tired of it.
yeah. And again, because it was so successful, again, you don't just chop the head off your golden goose
Right.
because the goose is old. If the goose is still laying eggs,
Yeah.
you're going to keep making omelets. So
Yeah, absolutely. Great analogy. Well, friends, let us know what you think. How should the NWO have ended, in your opinion? Did we miss something? Did we overlook or forget certain facets of this storyline? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, share the show, and we will see you next time.